What's up, everyone? Welcome for the first time, but certainly not the last, to Christmas. My name is Benito. I'm a writer and a podcaster with particular interest in folklore, holidays, and the traditions of folk Christianity, and so it might not surprise you then that my favorite thing is Christmas. And so what I'd like to do with this series of videos is lay out for, especially my presumably predominantly American audience, the way Christmas has been, used to be, is, not only in America but around the world, primarily Europe and primarily Central Europe, but we'll see that we look at a number of different places, and we can see the way that Christmas has changed and developed over the centuries. In America, we tend to think of Christmas as, a bright, jolly time full of lights, Mariah Carey songs, snow, funny reindeer, and so on. There's a lot more to it than that, and the relative safety of the modern world of electric lights, indoor heating, and that kind of thing have really changed the way that we look at the winter season. And so what we're going to do in this series, it's going to be multiple parts, I think something like 12 or 13 parts. We're going to go somewhat chronologically through the entire, what I consider the Christmas season. To me, I'm the kind of person, I'm what I call a Martinmas to Candlemas person, which means to me, Christmas begins on Martinmas, and what that means, we'll see in just a second, and it goes officially until Candlemas, which is the 2nd of February, although most things basically end on Epiphany. So if you want to think of it as Martinmas to Epiphany, also fine. And so we're going to follow that trajectory in this series. We're going to start here with Martinmas on November 11th, and we're going to move in this video. We're also going to look at November 24th and 25th, which is St. Catherine's Day. Then we'll look at November 29th and 30th, which is St. Andrew's Day. This is the 29th is actually St. Andrew's Eve, but my giant Advent arrow here blocked off the day. Obviously, this is the calendar for 2020. In subsequent years, the days of the week will be different. But this is when Advent begins in 2020, here on November 29th. Advent being the period of 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. Advent coming from the Latin word meaning the approach or the arrival, meaning the approach or the arrival of the nativity of Christ. Next time we will be moving forward and looking at December 3rd and 4th, St. Barbara's Eve and Day, and then also St. Nicholas Eve and Day on the 5th and 6th. But right now we're going to look at these November holidays, and I know a lot of people don't want to think about Christmas in November. They don't want to think about Christmas until at least right here, after Thanksgiving. Some people don't want to think about Christmas until December 24th, I guess. But the idea of Christmas creep, the idea that the Christmas season is getting bigger and bigger to accommodate commercial interests and concerns, the idea that that's a modern thing is not really true. Over the course of this video, not this video, but the course of this series, we'll see the expansion of Christmas is something that has gone on for a long time. And in fact, officially the winter season, the Christmas season, begins here mid-November on St. Martin's Day. And so we're going to start with St. Martin. St. Martin of Tours, a French saint, not originally French, but celebrated greatly in France because he was a bishop there in the city of Tours. His feast day is November 11th. Traditionally, the feast day of a saint is going to be the day of their death. In the case of St. Martin, it is in fact the day of his funeral. He died 2 or 3 days before And so his funeral day is commemorated on November 11th, which is also known as Old Halloween because of the discrepancy in days between the old Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar, which at this point in history, there's a difference of 12, 13 days. So what is currently to us is November 11th. If we were still using the Julian calendar, it would be October 31st. And so we'll actually see there's some overlap between Martinmas, St. Martin's Day, and Halloween, but that's also going to be true of a lot of these winter holidays. A lot of things that we as Americans think of as Halloween traditions, dressing up, going door to door, saying a little something, getting a treat in return, carving out lanterns, those kind of things that we think of as Halloween traditions, we're going to see tied to a lot of winter traditions over the course of this series. But let's first talk about Saint Martin of Tours. Here he is. The most famous legend about him is the story of him. You can see he was a Roman soldier. The famous story is him cutting his cloak in half to share with a beggar. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. Depending on the sources, St. Martin was born either in 316 or 336 CE in a city that is in what we would call Hungary these days. It was part of the Roman Empire at the time. His parents were part of the Roman pagan religion, but against their wishes, Martin became a Christian as a child. He converted as a young teenager, and he wanted to live life as a hermit and a monk. But because his father was a soldier and indeed a veteran, which required certain responsibilities and had certain benefits at that time, it required any child of a veteran to also serve as a soldier in the Roman army. And so Martin joined very reluctantly, literally dragged off in chains. He joined the Roman cavalry at age 15, where he was stationed in Gaul, the area roughly equivalent to modern France. During that time, his most famous miracle, this miracle of the cloak, occurred, where he, being generous of spirit, as they were traveling through a city, he had already given out all of his clothing to people who were in need. All he had left was his traveling cloak. And when he comes up on a beggar who has no clothes whatsoever, and it's wintertime, and he needs something to stay warm, Martin cuts his cloak in half, gives half to the beggar. That night, Martin has a vision of Jesus, who says to him, quoting Matthew chapter 24, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do also to me." And so because Martin had helped this beggar and given him a cloak, he sees this vision of Jesus wearing his cloak. And so he wakes up to find his cut-in-half cloak restored, a miracle. He's had a vision of Christ. He goes and gets baptized. He'd already converted, but he had not yet been baptized. At which point he decides he needs to confirm his allegiance to Christ. He is now a soldier of Christ and can no longer be a soldier of Rome. And so he decides to leave the Roman cavalry, especially since at that time the emperor was the Emperor Julian, who was known as Julian the Apostate because he was the first Roman emperor since Constantine to revert to the old state religion of Rome. He was a Neoplatonist philosopher. He was interested in the old gods. He was not interested in Christianity. As a result, he's known as Julian the Apostate. And so at the time when Julian was coming through to give annual bonuses to the soldiers, Martin says, I got to be real. I cannot continue on this violent path. I'm a soldier of Christ, not of man. And so he leaves the army under miraculous circumstances because Julian challenges him as a coward, saying you want to leave not because of religious compunction, but because you you're afraid, and he says, you know what, if you don't believe me, put me out on the front line with no weapons, no armor, no shield, and I'll be out there and I'll face the army completely naked if I need to. And he's prepared to do that the next day, but before that can even happen, the enemy come with a treaty to ask for peace. And so the next battle doesn't even happen. It's acknowledged as a miracle. Martin is let go. One last thing about the cloak, I should say. The Latin word for cloak was cappa, C-A-P-P-A, or a little cloak is a capella. And the Martin's cloak then became a popular relic in France, a holy object that belonged to a saint. And it got passed around in these little temporary shrines that were often tents and that kind of thing. And those tents came to be known as capellas. They became known as, and eventually that word becomes chapel. And the people who were in charge of those were the capellanos, the cloak people, and that word became chaplain. So if you know the word chaplain or chapel, that comes from the word for cloak. And that's why, even if you know from music, the word a cappella, that's Italian, meaning in the style of the chapel, because they would have sung without accompaniment. But that's where that comes from. Anyway, Martin goes on to become a monk. He's very interested in asceticism. He denies himself pleasures. He wears rough camel hair clothing. He eats poison grass that he didn't know was poison, but he was only trying to eat roots and not anything delicious. And he didn't know that he was eating hellebore, which is a poison grass, and he had to be miraculously cured. But anyway, despite wanting to live away from people in isolation and only focus on meditation on Christ and his own soul and that kind of stuff, he was made the bishop of the city of Tours in 371. According to a legend, in order to try to avoid this, he hid in a barn in a pen full of geese, and the loud honking of the geese gave his location away, and they found him, and they forced him to become bishop. That's going to come back in a second. So that's geese, because of that legend, geese are associated with Martin. Keep that in mind. As a bishop, one of the things that he did is he was known for roaming the countryside of Gaul and knocking down shrines and temples dedicated to the old Gallo-Roman religion, the old pagan religion. One of the most famous stories of this is one where he knocked down the temple, but next to it was a pine tree that had been dedicated to a pagan god, and he wanted to cut it down. The people who had strong feelings of, tradition and warmth, religious feeling towards this tree, they said no way, and they only eventually agreed if they said, we'll cut it down if you stand in the path of it. We'll tell you where to stand, and if your God is so real, he will protect you from the falling tree. And he says, yeah, no problem. So they tie him up, they place him in the path of the tree, which is already leaning in one direction, and so they know how it's going to fall. They cut down the tree, they push it over towards him. Right before it hits him, Martin makes the sign of the cross in the air. The tree is described as being like a spinning top, bouncing back, spinning around, and falling down on the pagans who had cut down the tree in order to kill him, and had specifically stood in what they thought was a safe spot, only for it to crash down on them. That kind of thing is exemplary of the kind of behavior of Saint Martin. One of his most famous relics is a hammer. It's really an axe, but it's also called the hammer of Saint Martin, which says on it, talks about him cutting down idols, and that no one should believe in gods that fall so easily. This is what it says carved on the handle of this, called the Hammer of Saint Martin. It's in the Netherlands right now. But anyway, if you read the story of the life of Saint Martin, he encounters demons and the devil over and over again. He is a powerful soldier for Christ. But eventually he dies in France in 397 CE. What does he die of? Illness, natural style causes. relatively old age, especially for a Christian saint. In fact, Saint Martin is one of the first non-martyrs recognized as a saint. The earliest saints were all martyrs, and so it's actually unusual for someone in this relatively early period to become a saint without having been martyred for their faith. Another example is Saint Nicholas. The two of them have a lot in common, as a matter of fact. Although there is an Irish legend that St. Martin died when he fell in a river, a mill stream, and he was crushed by the wheel of the mill. And so in Ireland on St. Martin's Day, you're not supposed to use anything that has wheels on it, so that no wheels turn on St. Martin's Day. But by most accounts, St. Martin died of natural illness causes because he was in his 80s. He is, to this day, venerated as the patron of soldiers because he was a soldier, beggars because he gave to beggars, most famously the cloak, but also throughout his life he gave to beggars, horses because he was a cavalryman, geese because of the story with the geese, tailors because of the thing with cutting his cloak in half, winemakers and recovering alcoholics. You might have noticed we had nothing in his life that had anything to do with that. That's more because his feast day, November 11th, is the time of the year when the first wine is ready. And so in real fact, the reason why he's probably associated with geese as well is because that time of the year is the time when geese are slaughtered. There's many other things as well. He's one of the main patrons of France, for example, as well. But these are just a couple of things that he is known to be the patron protector of. His day is remembered as Martinmas. This miss is the same as in Christmas because it's Mass. It's Martin's Mass. It is commemorated in many parts of the world, primarily Europe, but not exclusively. It is treated as a holiday. You can see here this photo. Here's Martin in his Roman soldier outfit on his white horse. That's going to be important in a second. This girl is probably dressed as an angel, if I had to guess. Or something. I don't know. And you can see all the children watching the parade here. Martinmas, celebrated around the world November 11th. Starting in early Middle Ages, Martinmas marked the beginning of what was known as St. Martin's Lent. It was it was a 56-day period from November 11th until Epiphany, January 6th, but you were supposed to fast on the weekdays, and so if you subtract the weekend days, that leaves you with 40 days, and it was supposed to be basically the wintertime equivalent of Lent in the spring, leading up to Easter. And so, Martinmas Lent, or St. Martin's Lent, was it. That was the kickoff to the winter season, right? St. Martin's Day is important because, it marks the end of the autumnal season, the end of the harvest period, and the beginning of winter. And so many of the traditions are based around that, right? It's, you have sown all of the wheat, right? The wine is ready. It's time to start doing winter things. Animals get butchered. And so because so many animals get butchered, geese, pigs, cows, it's a big feast day, not dissimilar to American-style Thanksgiving, right? You are grateful for the bounty of the earth because you suddenly have a surplus of food, some of which you're going to have to salt and preserve for use over the course of the winter, right? But because of these things, there are certain food traditions. Eating geese, that's the revenge, right? You eat a goose because the goose dropped a dime on St. Martin and he had to be a bishop even though he didn't want to. So you eat him as revenge, I guess. But in England, Martinmas beef is the big thing. In some countries, including Spain, they have the saying, his Martinmas will come as it does to every hog, which is the idea that you'll get what's coming to you, right? Because what happens to a hog on Martinmas? It gets slaughtered, right? And so it's kind of the opposite of every dog has his day, but the idea, there's a day, your time is coming. But one of the most common things besides eating geese, which is maybe the biggest thing for St. Martin's Lent. A lot of the other big things are bonfires, although those are becoming less common, mostly replaced by lantern parades, which could be generally children carrying lanterns, which in some places are still made by carving out beetroots, sugar beets, turnips with faces, very much like jack-o'-lanterns. We in the U.S. we use pumpkins because pumpkins are more common and easier to carve than turnips, but in Europe the original jack-o'-lanterns were turnips, rutabagas, beets, and so on, other hardy root vegetables. These days, St. Martin lanterns tend to be made of paper, and they have elaborate designs, and kids will go around singing St. Martin songs from place to place, and they get candy. So, if that sounds familiar, there it is, Old Halloween. But the common saying in parts of Europe is Martin rides in on a white horse. This is often literally true in that the person portraying St. Martin in the parade literally rides a white horse. But the saying is supposed to indicate that it marks the beginning of winter. He brings snow with him, and if it snows on St. Martin's Day, it's supposed to also snow on Christmas Day. Let's see. You can see here some examples of St. Martin lanterns, and you can see the kids parading through the street. They'd be led by a very similar a guy dressed like St. Martin, very similar to the picture from a minute ago. In Germany, a common thing to eat, you see here, these are called Martinhörnchen, which means little martin horn. It's kind of half of a pretzel, but it's kind of croissant shape. It's supposed to reflect the shape of a horse's hoof, but also the idea that it's half of a pretzel reflects Martin cutting his cloak in half, right? Poland has a very similar shaped kind of thing, although I think theirs is a little sweeter, made with almond paste and stuff that I believe is called a rogale. It's a croissant, and the story there is that the bakers started making them when a baker had a vision of St. Martin riding through town and his horse threw a golden horseshoe. He lost the golden horseshoe, and so he tried to make a croissant that reflects that shape. Yeah. So the other guy you need to know for Martinmas is this guy, Peltzmartel. You can see him here, dressed in furs. He's got a bag full of goodies and also a bundle of switches. Okay, so this is our, this is kind of our first real gift bringer figure that we're going to see, and certainly not the last, over the course of this video series. But here he is out in the woods with his Christmas tree, you can see decorated, smoking a pipe and so on. So Peltzmartel, if you look, you can see the M-A-R-T here. That's from Martin. The word Peltzmartel, it might be from the German word Pelz, that means fur, as like pelt in English. So it might mean furry martin, little fur martin, or it might come from a verb pelzen, that means like to smack, because you can see his bundle of switches here, similar to some of the other figures we're going to see. Naughty kids get a smack from the bundle of switches. So furry martin or beating martin, smacking martin, whatever. This is a tradition primarily in Swabia and Franconia, which are these regions right here that are today part of Bavaria, although if my understanding is correct, they do not really think of themselves as Bavarians. A lot of the traditions we'll be looking at in this video series come from this area, southern Germany, and then the adjoining areas like Austria, Switzerland, and so on. The Alps, the Alpine region, is really where a lot of the things we're going to be talking about come from. So even up into like Alpine France, like Strasbourg and such over here. But right now we're looking specifically at these two areas, part of the modern state of Bavaria. Peltzmartel is where he is. He's kind of, in these areas, he's a very St. Nicholas type figure. He comes on St. Nicholas Eve with a bag full of treats. He scatters them on the ground to attract children, and then, according to what they say, he swats them for good luck, not because he's swatting naughty children. This is still an annual tradition in some places, including Wassertrudingen, and there might be often more than one Peltzmartel. They often come in groups. They dress wearing fur coats. They have long beards. Bells. Bells are really common in these kind of traditional costumes. Blackened faces, not blackface. It's not a minstrel thing, but they have smudges of soot and such on their faces. They throw the treats, especially nuts. As a result, Peltzmartel is also commonly known as Nussmartel or Nut Martin. You can see some pictures here of some traditional Peltzmartel designs. They've got their bags and all the kids. Here you can see with some face blacking going on, a group of Peltzmartel here. This headline, Süßes und Saures von Peltzmartel, that's literally sweet and sour from Peltzmartel, but Süßes oder Saures is how they say trick or treat in German. And so yeah, you kind of get an idea of how this goes. You can see their bundle of switches and so on. Why does the furry martin appear? We'll talk more about this in a later video where we discuss St. Nicholas particularly, but it has to do with the Reformation. When the Reformation comes to Germany, a lot of the more religious saintly figures like St. Martin and St. Nicholas that were so beloved in particular areas have to become secular versions of themselves. And so you can retain your St. Martin traditions if he stops being St. Martin and starts being a thinly veiled forest version of himself. Anyway, another St. Martin tradition is what's known as the Wolfauslassen, which means letting out the wolves. At this time, this is when the shepherds and cowherds would come in from pasture, and in the old days you could tell they were coming because you could hear the bells of the sheep and the cow that were used, to let the herdsmen know where their animals were, but also to scare off animals. These areas would have been full of wolves and bears, but this tradition is the idea that we're bringing the animals in now, the wolves are allowed to come out, right? So the ringing of the bells is supposed to indicate to the wolves that now they can go wherever they want. They don't have to avoid the pasture land where they would previously have been killed if they came. As time has gone on, and the animals are not being moved from pasture into town anymore, it's all about the bells. And so what ends up happening is you get a troop of about 50 young men, led by a single herdsman, and they carry these enormous, like 50-ish pound bells strapped to their waist, and they ring them as they march into town, and they do that with, suggestive hip thrusting motions. And there's also whip cracking as another big thing associated with it. Usually the herdsman has the whip, and he cracks the whip, rings the bells, and it's a big procession into town. And it's a popular tourist thing these days in Bavaria. And so, yeah, there's a number of places where St. Martin's Day in this time period is kind of associated with wolves as a result of that idea. All right, let's move on from St. Martin to St. Catherine's Day. Here we're looking at November 24th, 25th. This is St. Catherine of Alexandria. There are many Saints Catherine, but she is one of the most popular ones. She was one of what were called the 14 Holy Helpers in the Middle Ages. Her common signifier, her iconographic signifier in art is a wheel. She was tortured, or meant to be tortured, on and with a wheel known as a breaking wheel, which was usually used to shatter people's bones. We'll see in a second that it didn't quite work out, but this is her main visual signifier, to the point that this kind of torture wheel is now called a Catherine wheel, because of her story. So St. Catherine, despite his efforts to torture her with a wheel, she was killed by being beheaded by the Emperor Maximinus II around 305 CE in Alexandria in Egypt. So this would be still a hair before the legalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire by Constantine via the Edict of Milan, which would come in 313 CE, if I'm remembering correctly. And so this is still during a time of great persecution of Christians, and a lot of early church martyrs come from this period. And so because she was tortured on a wheel, she is often associated with spinning, like spinning wheel, like in Sleeping Beauty. She's not the only one. There are many wintertime figures that are associated with spinning of wool or flax into yarn, and we will see more of those later. There's a lot of them. Why? Partly because spinning was one of the major winter time chores to do, right? Once the farming stuff is done, we've got to focus on other things like making clothes, making yarn, stuff to keep us warm, right? So, much like St. Martin's Day, St. Catherine's Day is also a day that's supposed to mark the arrival of winter. In a lot of places, Martin's Day is kind of the winter kickoff for men. St. Catherine's Day is the winter kickoff for women. And so a lot of traditions for St. Catherine's Day have to do with women, especially unmarried women. At this time, in a lot of countries, France especially, unmarried women on St. Catherine's Day pray for husbands. In French Canada, they make taffy. It's called Taffy Day. But otherwise, a lot of countries, their St. Catherine celebrations are centered around finding husbands for women who have made it to the age of 25 with no husband. Can you believe it? Some of the things associated with St. Catherine include these right here. These are called Cattern cakes. You can see Cattern, obviously, from Catherine. This is one of those things where people in England said, what if we said whatever letters we wanted? And so Catherine time is also Catterntide. But anyway, Cattern cakes are a common thing in England. They're apparently having something of a resurgence in popularity thanks to the internet spreading recipes around. You can find these cakes. Catherine wheel fireworks, which are these. If you've ever seen one of these, this is called a Catherine wheel. So they are naturally quite popular to fire off on St. Catherine's Day. There would obviously be an abundance of fireworks left over, especially in England. There'd be an abundance of fireworks left over from Guy Fawkes Night earlier in November, where they shoot off many, many fireworks. This is in France here, where young women who have reached the age of 25 without getting married scandalously are known as Catherinettes, and they celebrate the day. Either they themselves or their friends or loved ones make them these ludicrously large hats that are always green and yellow. They have to wear them. They parade around the town so everyone knows that they're available, I guess. And then on St. Catherine's Day, they process, I should say, more specifically, to the statue of St. Catherine, and they pray for a husband. And so, good old times, good old-fashioned values. Anyway, that's St. Catherine's Day. Let's talk about St. Andrew's Day, which comes at the end of the month of November. St. Andrew's Day is the 30th. The 29th is St. Andrew's Eve. And a lot of these places, or when I say places, for a lot of these holidays, the kickoff is the night before, right? When the sun goes down and it gets dark, right? We think about Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Halloween is really kind of like the last one where it's really, that's the thing. The night before, the evening, the eve, All Hallows Eve is the center of activity. And in much the same way that All Hallows Eve is the center of spooky stuff happening before All Hallows Day, a lot of these are the same thing, right? So if you have a big Saint's Day, St. Nicholas Day on the 6th, expect the spooky stuff to happen after dark on December 5th, right? Similarly, St. Andrew's Day November 30th. November 29th is when the spooky stuff happens. St. Andrew, you've probably heard of if you know the Bible at all. He's an apostle. He's one of the Big 12. He's the brother of St. Peter, the famous one, right? The first pope, the one who walked on water, Jesus' best friend. So Andrew, by some accounts, is the first apostle, Peter's brother. So I don't need to tell you that much about him. He's, well, first of all, he doesn't do much in the Bible, but he is in his the legends about him. He was crucified on an X-shaped cross, and so as a result, the St. Andrew's cross is shaped like an X. So if you've seen the Scottish flag, which is the white X on the blue field, that is a St. Andrew's cross. And St. Andrew is, among other places, he's the patron of Scotland. And so in Scotland, St. Andrew's Day is the national day. They have what they call bank holidays, time off work, and so on. And they celebrate Scottish culture. It doesn't have very much to do with a lot of the rest of the world, how they celebrate St. Andrew's Day, and more accurately, St. Andrew's Eve. As you can see in the photo here, it's this spooky kind of thing with this, very fortune teller looking kind of person standing over a candle with these two young ladies who are showing some interest in what's going on. You can see there's spoons on the table and so on. What's all that about? Well, St. Andrew's Day is a time that is considered to be especially potent foretelling one's future. This used to be true in the British Isles and in America for Halloween. It used to be Halloween was the night where young women especially, but young men as well, could perform acts of divination that would reveal to them the face or the name or some information about their future spouse, right? And so in much of Europe, St. Andrew's Day is like that. And these parts are from Wikipedia. Sorry, that's not going to be the case in future videos. But yeah, so in parts of Ukraine, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Poland, Russia, and Romania, the night before St. Andrew's Day, St. Andrew's Eve, is suitable for magic to reveal a young woman's future husband, right? That's what I was just saying. And we'll look at some of those specific acts of divination in just a second. Also, St. Andrew's Day was very associated with vampire activity. The idea was the worst time for vampires of the year was St. Andrew's Eve, which would last until St. George's Eve in April. But in Romania specifically, they believed that vampires were on the prowl. On St. Andrew's Eve, you needed to have garlic up your windowsills. Stay away from crossroads, as vampires from adjoining villages would meet and have turf wars, I guess, at the crossroads. So watch out for that. There's also a Russian fairy tale about a woman who encounters a vampire at St. Andrew's Day. You can look that up. But also wolves. During the night of St. Andrew's Eve, wolves are allowed by whom? I don't know, but they can eat all the animals they want. And also it is said that on this night alone, wolves can speak to humans, but if a human hears them, they will die. So that's a real, I would want to hear that, but I don't want to die. I don't know. Also, they might eat me. Wolves are out. Vampires are out. The spooks are out, and you can tell your future. So early on St. Andrew's Day, mothers go out to the garden, gather tree branches. Let's see, especially apple, pear, and cherry trees, rosebush branches. Each one is then designated to a different family member, and the one whose bunch blooms by New Year's Day will be lucky and healthy the next year. There's a very similar tradition for St. Barbara's Day that we will look at in the next video. It's this tradition of cutting a branch of budding flowers and then seeing which one blooms is much more associated with St. Barbara. So we'll see that in the next video. Let's see, single girls. All the single ladies must put a branch of sweet basil under their pillow. And if someone takes them in her dreams, she will marry soon. Put wheat in a dish, water it until New Year's. The nicer the wheat looks, the better the year to come. All right. Nice divination methods. Um, another common one, which is done not only at St. Andrew's Day, but also can be done on St. Barbara's, can be done on St. Nicholas, probably Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. There's a couple of key nights when it's supposed to be the best time to do the practice of Bleigießen. This is done with a Bleigießen kit. Bleig means lead. You have your little heroin spoon, I guess, and you put little pieces of lead, although these days it's not lead anymore because that's dangerous. It's usually tin or wax these days, but you put it in the spoon, you melt it over this candle. It's kind of cute that these little lumps are already shaped like things like pigs, which are a common New Year's symbol in much of Europe, especially Germany, but not exclusively Germany. Anyway, you put it in there, you melt it, you drop it in this cold water, and then it'll become some weird shape like this. And your job is to interpret this shape and divine from that what your future will be, right? So, like if it comes out looking like a crown, you'll marry a prince or something, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, Bleigießen, a common divination method for St. Andrew's Eve. In Poland, they do a similar thing where instead of kind of like this kit, what will happen is they drip candle wax through the hole in a key into water, and they interpret the shapes of the wax there. Let's see, other divination things. In Romania, young women put 41 grains of wheat below their pillow before they go to sleep. If someone comes, look, we saw a variation on that. Someone steals the grains, they're going to be married in the next year. In some parts of the country, young women take a candle from Easter and light it, and then at midnight they bring it to a fountain, and then they pray for St. Andrew to give them a glimpse of their future husband. So there you go. Like I said, a lot of those traditions were very popular in the 1800s in the British Isles and the U.S. for Halloween. And you can look that stuff up as well. But let's see. I think, yeah, that's the end. Okay, so there we are. There's our November saints. We've got Martin, who, like it or not, officially kicks off Christmas. St. Catherine, St. Andrew. Next time we'll talk about St. Barbara and St. Nicholas, the latter of whom you may have heard of. So hang in there, and until next time, have a good Christmas.